What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy with Hometown Commander, back for another video on deck tech, and man, I'm excited. So for anyone that hasn't seen it, I would recommend you go back and watch the podcast episode that just came out the Friday previous to this video. Mikey and I talked about the future of Hometown Commander, what we want to do for content, and some really cool things coming in the future. The one thing that I committed to do was creating deck techs for all of the main decks in my collection. Now, I know that I posted Goreclaw deck tech a few months ago, and it's a good deck tech. I think it does a good job at saying what the deck does, but I actually just recently did a fairly big overhaul of the Goreclaw, trying to get a little more consistency, trying to give it better punch, and I actually changed up, in all reality, a good amount of creatures. The goal there was to try to get more card draw, and in all reality, just try to make the deck more consistent. So what I wanted to do was give it time to shine again, present you with the deck list as it sits up today, and then what I'd like to do is in the future, I'd love to come back and show you the changes that I make as time progresses. Goreclaw is my deck. It's my favorite deck. It's my favorite deck I've built. It's the second deck I ever built, but it is the oldest deck that currently sits in my deck box. It's everything I love about green. It's everything I love about green and Commander. It's my favorite deck to give to new players because it's fairly straightforward. It works really well, and it just punches. It punches really hard. So I like to describe Goreclaw as, in all reality, a mid-range Stompy deck. Mid-range meaning we're not looking to start fast. We're looking to ramp. We're looking to set our board up. And Stompy referring to trying to place large creatures on the board and winning the game with big creatures and the advantage that come with them. So first off, we'll read Goreclaw. Goreclaw, Terror of Kull Sisma, 3 and a green for a legendary creature bear, and she is looking mighty fierce in that photo. Creature spells you cast the power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. That's point number 1. We're trying to play all our big boys / big things, because there's a lot of things in this deck, for 2 cheaper than they normally would be. And then it says, whenever she attacks, each creature you control power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and trampled on a turn. So we're not just trying to dump big creatures down, but we're trying to attack, and we're hopefully going to win the game. Now, we got lots of ways to do that, but the good thing I like about this deck is it tends to make really good advantage even without your Crater Hoof Triumph plays. This deck does a really good job at pushing that advantage even without them, but of course, when we can get them, we're going to take great advantage of them. I just want to show off this deck, at least for the last little bit, has been sitting in my Hometown Commander sleeves. Mikey and I each made a set of these. We take these to pre-release, and we enjoy these. But because we have a wink, wink, nudge, nudge new thing coming up, it's going to be on the channel. I'll go back and listen to that podcast episode. I thought, what deck deserves to be in these sleeves more than Goreclaw? Well, the most important part of this deck is creatures. So I feel like that's where we got to start, right? I sorted the creatures in lowest CMC to highest CMC, just a random order from there. So we're just going to talk about each creature and what rolls we get here. So we have a couple mana dorks. First up, we have Lana Warehouse. This is the pretty down area promo printing. I don't like to run a ton of them. And the reason is because I want to ramp my lands quickly. I tend to find that mana dorks can get wiped off the board really easily, and that sets your deck back. I want to rely on getting my lands out more than I want to rely on having the mana dorks. But let me tell you, if I can start the game with any one of these guys in my hand, it makes that hand immediately better, and I'm willing to do it because most people will let a mana dork go for the first couple turns. But of course, once that first board wipe season comes around, you want to make sure that you're not in the way. I think a lot of this deck relies on you not pushing too hard, because then you're going to take all that removal that comes with it, right? But what you want to do is try to find a playline that gets as much bulk of your power out at the same time and do something with it right away. I don't think we want to play our creatures and then wait to turn around the table. This is one of those decks where we really want to dump and use it right away. Lana Warehouse is just 1 green. With Whisper of the Wilds, shout out to Mikey here of our Tarkir favorite block. This one taps for green, but if we have creatures power 4 or greater, which is going to be a lot, that one taps for 2. Same thing here with Elysian Carotid. 1 mana of any color. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, we get 2 mana of any color instead. So I like these guys because they're just 2 for 1, which is still 2 mana for just 1 mana, which is still good at the end of the day. But Once we have a creature's power 4 or greater, man, we're going to get 2 mana, which, as you can see in this deck, as we get through these creatures, most of our creatures, the big creatures, are going to come down to just green pips. So we really want that green mana. We want to use it effectively. Next up, we have Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. This is this works for 2 things in our deck. One, it's a draw outlet. The first ability says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if its controller may draw a card if the power is greater than each other creature's power. So if we're playing the biggest creature that's on the board, we're going to draw, which is a good thing because the deck has the tendency to just run its hand out and then have nothing left. So a lot of this big change was getting these card draw options where we can try to hopefully start replenishing our hand. But the second thing, tap a green at X mana in a combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures control. We have some massive creatures in this deck, especially when we buff them. So this is going to help us get a lot of mana and take those big turns that are going to end the game. Our other 3 mana creatures here, we have Ronus the Indomitable. With Goreclaw, this is going to come down for 1 green, Death Touch Indestructible. Can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater, but that's okay. This is one of my favorite turn 2 plays if you have or turn 3 plays if you have some ramp, or I like to sometimes put this down right before I put down Goreclaw if you can. This is just a good blocker, and it does have a little bit of a buff there, but we really use that. We got Terra Stomper from Capenna. This is a card I wasn't quite sure if it was going to make it, but I really like this card. It goes and gets the land, which this will go down to 2 green pips most of the time when Goreclaw's out, and that land just helps. In the early game, I don't mind playing this for 3 mana and getting the land and having a creature out. Same thing, can't attack or block though unless we control 7 or more lands. So it's a little bit of a downside, but most of the time I don't think I mind it. Because I think we're going to get enough value off it, and we're going to try to hit those lands anyway. 4 mana territory, we got Tasky, Bearer of Secrets. This card is a powerhouse. It is a 1/1. Doesn't look very menacing, but that last line of text, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, is huge. We have a lot of trampling creatures, and we have creatures that are going to be really tough to block, including a couple guys in the air, which means that when we deal that damage for every creature that deals damage, we're drawing cards. We're going to refill our hand, and then even if we get wiped, even if we get dealt with, we have more cards to deploy, and we have more cards to use. Next up, we got Sorak, the Hunk Caller, another Tarkir shout out. This guy 5/4 for 4, so it's going to come down for 2 mana with Goreclaw, which is giant. Formidable at the beginning of combat in your turn. If creatures control a power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste. This card's a great way to give Goreclaw haste the turn she comes down because she's not going to be able to attack. But if we can get this down before her, or even later in the game, this can give one of those massive creatures we just had to spend a bunch of more mana on to give it haste. There's some big creatures in this list that once we get up towards the top, if we can give those things haste and start swinging, we're just going to generate a lot of value. Next up, we got Questing Beast, one of my favorite creatures in the deck from Throne of Eldraine. 4 mana, 4/4 with a lot of text. This guy comes down for 2 mana with Goreclaw out, and this is my secret tech. If you've listened to our podcast for any amount of time, you know Mikey loves his fogs. He loves his fogs, and he loves stopping this deck with fogs. But what I love about Questing Beast is that 3rd line of text. Combat damage that we dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented. I am waiting for the game that I get to counter his fogs with Questing Beast. But Questing Beast is just a monster. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it stops a lot of tokens from chump blocking it. And that Vigilance and Death Touch really helps as a blocker. I think the literal cherry on top would be if this thing had a reach, but then I think it actually would be too broken, even though it's mythic. And believe me, Eldraine was known for some broken mythics. Next up, we got Ovenwald Oddity. 4 mana, 4/4 for a beast from Vow. When I saw this card, this is Goreclaw. This is a 4/4 for 4 that could come down for 2 with Goreclaw. Trample Haste, which is exactly what we want. And then for 7 mana, we get to flip it. And on the backside, gives all of our creatures +1/+1 trample and haste. Man, if we can get there and we can get this thing flipped, we're going to have a lot of good times. We don't have a ton of haste enablers in this deck, besides a few big ones. But I will take every piece of haste enabulation that I can take. Next up is a newer card, and that is Yeva, Nature's Herald. This is, I have a couple cards in here to give a little bit of a flash sub-theme. A way to get our creatures down on our opponent's turn, so that way they're not summoning second when that comes back to our turn, we can attack with them. I really like Yeva because it comes down for 2 with Goreclaw, and then hopefully we can start putting some creatures down on our opponent's end steps. And that will just allow us to push our strategy forward on our turn. So we're playing Nylea Keen-Eyed. This is the cost reduction Nylea. This is when creature spells you cast 1 less to cast. So with this in Goreclaw, all of our creatures are costing 3 less to cast almost all of the time. And that's great. It really helps get our creatures down for just green pips, which is really important, especially since we have a lot of ways to get a lot of green mana. The ability there, 3 mana, reveal the top, it's a creature, put it in your hand, is actually really useful. Sometimes that is something that's worth doing on your opponent's turn if you're not sure if you want to run your board out. You can get some creatures into your hand and prepare for your next turn. God Eternal Ronus, one of our potential game enders here, because a lot of the times people don't think, I don't think people look at this card. It says, when it enters the battlefield, double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures gain vigilance. Well, if we have Goreclaw out, all of our creatures now have trample, vigilance, and their powers are doubled, which means we're going to nail through for a ton of damage. If you can hit this thing most of the time with a full board, you're going to knock at least one player out if you play your attack right. This is not Craterhoof. Craterhoof is our favorite ender. That's going to end the game most of the time very handedly. But I think Ronus does a really good job most of the time at being a way to take at least one person out if you place it right. Next up, we got Workshop Warchief from Capenna. This is the promo art they just announced. I just have the proxy there in front of a real war chief that I have, but I love this art. This is Thragtusk in all reality. I think Thragtusk is a teeny bit better because it can be blinked, although I'm not playing into blink at all, which is why I like the war chief. But the reason I like the war chief is the blitz. 6 mana, you can blitz it in, and that blitz does get reduced by Goreclaw. So a good thing in there to come in and give it haste. When it comes in, you get 3 life, and when it dies, you get a 4/4, and that 4/4 still works with Goreclaw. We're going still going into 5 mana here. Bellowing Tangleworm. This is one of the all-stars of the deck. Intimidate. Other green creatures you control have Intimidate. Intimidate means that they can't be blocked except by artifact creatures or creatures that share a color with it. So if no one's playing green at the table or no one has green creatures out, we get lots of free attacks. And believe me, there are creatures in here you do not want to get free attacks. Next up, we got my favorite frog, Froghemoth from AFR. I love this card. 3 mana with Goreclaw out. Trample, haste. Whenever it does damage, we exile cards. Gives us a chance to either gain a little bit of life or put +1/+1 counters on it. And believe me, those counters go a long way at making this card harder to deal with. I've had plenty of turns where you dump this out and then you dump an Outer Gargaroth or something like that on another 5 mana creature, and you take a good attack, and the board just looks even worse now since things are getting reduced. Next up, kind of a sleeper pick in this deck. I don't see it very often, but when I do see it, this card does a lot of work, and that's Thicket Elemental. So it has Kicker, 1 and a green. When you kick it, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a creature. If you do, put it on the battlefield. This is giant because, Thicket Elemental comes down for 3, and it's a 4/4. So it's worth the spot in the Goreclaw, but I've kicked this and gotten a lot of really good creatures. I kicked this once and got a Gnawbone. I've kicked this and got a lot of really good creatures, and I'm willing to pay the 2 mana to roll the dice. There's probably 3 creatures in this deck, being those mana rocks, that after about turn 6, you really don't want to reveal with this. But I think every other creature in this deck, I would be willing to see come off of this, and I think it's going to do me a lot of good. So I like Thicket Elemental. It's there for that reason. It's a little bit of utility. Next up, we got the boy, Elder Gargaroth, Beast Ram 21. This card is massive value. Comes down for 3 mana. Vigilance, Reach, Trample. And then whenever an attacker blocks, you either get the 3/3, the 3 life, or a card. I do choose most of the time the 3/3 or the card, because I think those are both really relevant abilities. I don't really gain the life very often, but it is good to have. But the big thing to remember is it's when it blocks as well, and it has Reach. So it can actually block those flyers, which my deck does not have a ton of. And it will also block some of those smaller creatures as well to make them tough to get in. This is a really good card when it comes down for 3. For getting into 6, we got Kodama the East Tree. I love this card. Reach. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put on the battlefield with this ability, you can put a permanent with equal or lesser value from your hand onto the battlefield. Lands count for this. Creatures count for this. Artifacts and enchantments count for this. When Kodama comes out, it makes every one of your creature plays better, because if you have a creature that's less CMC in your hand, you get it for free. This also works off Goreclaw. If Goreclaw comes out, we have a creature smaller than Goreclaw for CMC, which doesn't happen very often. It could come out for free as well. But the good part here is if you play a creature, you can put a land down for free. And that is giant, especially when we're trying to take these big turns. Kogla the Titan Ape, one of my other favorite green creatures in this deck from Ikoria. It's a big ape. It fights when it comes in. Whenever it attacks, you destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. People don't really pay attention to that, and it gets really good. I don't have a ton of humans to take advantage of the second effect, which is perfectly fine. This is going to come in, it's going to fight, and it's one of a couple creatures that do that. One of the newer ads, Soul of the Harvest. 6 mana for a 6/6, so it's going to come down for 4 with Goreclaw. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under you control, you may draw a card. It doesn't say cast, it says enter. So the good part there is if we use any of our effects that let us put cards down for free, we'll get to that in a second, or we put a creature down with that Kodama, or we use other things, this is going to draw us a card either way, which is huge. It's really good, and we want to start refilling our hand as much as possible. Thunderfoot Bailiff. This just helps us buff even bigger. 4 mana comes down with Goreclaw. It gets +2/+2, and other creatures get +2/+2 and trample. It's just going to make our board even bigger, even wider, and we're going to start smashing through for even more. We got Voron Monstrous Raider. This is in here for 2 reasons. One, it has trample and haste. Haste is a really good ability, and we need to take it when we can take it, because you'll never realize how important haste is until you need it. The second is, this hoses counter stacks, and that's really important. I have 1 or 2 creature tutors in here, so if I'm playing against a big counter stack, this is actually a really good way to hose them. It says if I would put a counter on, I get double. And if my opponents were to put a counter on, they get half that many rounded down. So if someone goes to put 1 counter on a creature, it actually gets reduced to 0. This is one of those cards that's really important. And if I'm in the right matchups, it's a creature that I definitely prioritize. What I like about this deck is there's a little bit of toolbox nature to it as well. So if I have a tutor, I can kind of figure out what's necessary in that moment. Next up, a newer card by way of another deck in my collection. That is Dawnglade Regent, 7 mana for an 8/8. When it comes in, we become the Monarch. Remember, Monarch says you draw at the end of your turn, and then you get it taken away with combat. As long as you're the Monarch, permanents you control of hexproof. Well, obviously, people want to take our stuff out, and if we can avoid that single target removal, believe me, we want to avoid it. Thorn Mammoth, 7 mana for 6/6 trample. When it comes in or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Thorn Mammoth fights a creature you don't control. I think a lot of people forget that this can fight when another creature comes in, and people only think it fights when it comes in. You can get reoccurring value off the fights off of Thorn Mammoth, and that's why I think it's worth the mana. I think it's a little expensive. I wish it was like a 6 mana 5/5 instead of a 7 mana 6/6, but I will happily take this because I think it's really good and it puts in good work. Now we're getting up into the 7s. In these 7 slots, these are giant creatures, so we really need them to do a lot. Old Gnawbone, man, this thing is a powerhouse of value. Whenever creature control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. I don't have any ways to take extra turns in this deck, and that's fine. A well-placed Gnawbone can set up a turn to just win the game. And Gnawbone's one of those creatures that half the time doesn't need to attack to get value. You just need to put it out, and then it generates value. Next up, we got Nyxbloom Ancient, going to triple the amount of mana our lands tap for. This is huge. It just propels us forward. It just makes it easier, and it's a 5/5, so it's not shabby. We got Titan of Industry. What a big elemental. I love this card. When I saw this in Capenna, I was like, man, this goes in Goreclaw. When it comes in, it has reach and trample, so it's going to help us with our flying decks that we're going to play against. But when it comes in, nuke an artifact or enchantment, 5 life, a 4/4, or a shield counter, giant. Most of the time that shield counter goes on Goreclaw if she's out. But Titan of Industry, more than worth the 5 mana when Goreclaw's out. We got Enrace Forerunners, another one of our finishers. Not as big as Craterhoof, but still does a good job at giving our creatures vigilance specifically. If we're in a tight matchup with a lot of creatures, vigilance does come in handy. And now we got our big boys up here in 8 mana. Voronclex, Voice of Hunger. One of my least favorite green cards, but it does its job. Whenever we tap a land for mana, we get double it. I get 1 mana extra. And then whenever our opponent taps a land, it doesn't untap. This is one of those cards that is a lightning rod, but for the time we have it, it does us a lot of good, and for that reason, it is more than worth it in here. There we got our boy Craterhoof. This is our game ender, and enters the battlefield. You get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control. Gives all of our creatures trample as well. So if Goreclaw's not out, this will still give our board trample. And this ends games because a lot of the times when you get that pump with 8 or 9 creatures or 7 creatures, there are no blocks in the world that are going to save a lot of people from that combat. Now up on the big end, we got Apex Devastator, 10 mana Cascade 4 times. Why not? If I'm going to pay 8 mana for this, I will happily take an extra 4 Cascades. You'll see any reason I've built a little bit more into hopefully taking advantage of this, but I don't think this is ever bad. And even if this gets countered, you still get the Cascade 4 times, so I will take it. We have Throsta. Tempest Roar, 12 mana. It costs 3 less to cast for each other spell you've cast this turn. So this is our last creature we can cast in a little string of creatures. It's going to get really cheap. Goreclaw will help reduce it as well. So most time this is probably going to come down to 2 green mana. Trample over planeswalkers and haste. And it has hexproof as long as they enter the battlefield this turn. It's just going to be tough to deal with. And then one of my favorite green creatures in the deck, Ghalta, Primal Hunger. 10 green, cost X less to cast, where X is the number of total power creatures control. This thing always comes down for 2 green. And let me tell you, it is a mess to deal with when it comes down. One of the biggest changes I made in the last year to this deck was snow. Almost all my lands in this deck are snow lands, and it was for 2 cards. One was this Blizzard Brawl, a 1 mana fight spell that gives the creature we cast it on indestructible, which is huge. That helps with a lot of attacks, and it helps with pushing our stuff forward. And the other one was Into the North. This is a 2 mana ramp spell, but it goes and gets a snow land. And one of our favorites is Faceless Haven, but it also will go get any other snow lands that we have. We also are playing Finale Devastation, one of our other finishers. X green, search your library or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield. Creatures you control get +X in haste until end of turn. If you can dump 10 into this, which is what you need to do to get that +X, I have yet to see a game end if I don't have a decent board with this card out. This card is an absolute all-star, and it's one of my favorite cards in the deck. And if you can set it up right, it wins games, in the truth. We got Kadama's Reach. Good old rampy ramp. Go get 2 lands, put one of them tapped. But what we really want are our 2 mana ramp spells. We got Nature's Lore. We got Rampant Growth. We got 3 visits. These are the guys that we really love seeing, especially on turn 2. Go get that extra land, put us ahead. There are no other forest targets for these 2 except basic forest, so they're just going to go get basic forest, and of course Rampant Growth goes and gets basic forest. One of our creature tutors in Sylvan Tutor, it puts it on the top, which is okay. We got a lot of ways in here to draw cards, so Sylvan Tutor most of the time will help us set up something, or if you can get it before an effect that lets you reveal off the top, even better. And then one of the other most famous finishers, Triumph of the Hordes. It's in here because it helps us end the game. Even with a mid-tier board without a Crater Hoof, a Triumph of the Hordes can definitely win us a game. Those blocks get tough, and remember, Trample and Infect just work really well, and a player only needs 10 poison counters to lose the game. We're only playing a couple instants. We got Beast Within. The reason I like Beast Within over Corrosive Grip is just because it can hit anything. Not just artifact or enchantments. Beast Within is really important. You want to hit an important thing at the time you need to hit it. We got Heroic Intervention. We're trying to protect the board if possible. And then Worldly Tutor. Go do this on your opponent's turn, get something, put it on top, and have it ready to go. We're playing 3 Planeswalkers. We have Nissa, who shakes the world. This is just going to help us tap our green mana for more mana. And we get to make our lands into 3/3s if that's something we care about. We got Vivian, Monstrous Advocate. This is a combo enabler in a lot of ways. So it says you can look at the top of your library at any time. You can cast creature spells from the top of your library. That's huge. That extends our hand, right? Now we have more creatures that we can see. The +1 gives us a 3/3, which is perfectly great. That's not bad, especially the turn she comes down. We don't want to use her -2 yet, but her -2 will win you games. This is when you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature card, lesser CMC, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle your library. One of the biggest things to do in this deck is take a creature like Ghalta, or a creature like Throsta, who their CMCs are 12, right? And I can -2 Vivian and go get Crater Hoof, I can go get Emrace Foreigners, I can go get these giant creatures, because it doesn't matter what we paid, it matters what converted mana cost they are on the stack. I have ended plenty of games casting a Ghalta for 2 mana, getting a Crater Hoof, and finishing the game. And that is massive. And then we have Vivian, Champion of the Wilds. This is one of our other flash enablers. Try to allow us to play creatures on our opponent's turn. I also do like that it gives a creature vigilance and reach, which can be really big if we got one of our big boy creatures. This is going to allow us to give it vigilance. And not only that, but give it reach so it can block on the way back as well. Enchantments, we got nothing but the goods. We got Bear Umbra. This is a way, really, it's a pun. We can protect Goreclaw with the Bear Umbra. But it just helps protect Goreclaw, and it taps all of our lands when we attack, so we can keep a lot of stuff open and potentially cast creatures on other people's turns if we have that out. Beastmaster Ascension, it ends games. This is one of those enchantments that with Goreclaw's Trample, that +5/+5 will always lead to big damage, and this is really tough to stop. This ends up being a lightning rod for removal, but if this is the thing that people want to remove, I'm happy to let them remove it. We got Concordant Crossroads. This is a newer addition to this deck. Having a good turn with this deck with a Concordant Crossroads out is going to get you farther to end the game. Giving all your creatures haste is just going to help. The only downside to Concordant Crossroads is this says all creatures have haste, not just your creatures. So we got to be a little careful when we deploy this. I like to think of this as more of a finisher. I play all my big creatures and everyone's like, oh, okay, there's all these big creatures. And then, oh, Concordant Crossroads. Well, and then swing away. We got Defense of the Heart, one of my favorite cards. Beginning your upkeep, if an opponent controls 3 or more creatures, which is going to be a lot of the time, sacrifice it. You go get 2 creatures of your choice, put them on the battlefield. A lot of this time, this is going to set up. I like getting Gnawbone off of this. I really like getting stuff like Nyx Plumation out of this, stuff that's going to get us immediate value. I do like getting Voron Collects off this as well, but I really like this because this allows us to get what we need in the moment, slam it on the battlefield. They don't have haste though, but they're going to start doing what we need them to do right away. Elemental Bond. Whenever a creature power 3 or greater comes into the battlefield, draw a card. Every creature in our deck besides those 3 mana dorks has power 3 or greater, and that Vivian that makes tokens with power 3. So every single creature besides those 3 that enters the battlefield under control is going to draw us a card, and that is massive. That's what we need. We have Fight Rigging. Who doesn't love Fight Rigging? Hideaway 5s, do you look at those top 5? Love hiding away a Crater Hoof or something like that, because you get to blitz it in right in combat, and people don't expect it. You put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, and if it's 7 or greater, you get to play that exile card. The best part of this is you continually get the counters, so it's worth the 3 mana for that free card. But I think it just fits the deck so well. What's more mono green than 2 rhinos punching each other in a boxing ring? Next up, we got Garrick's Uprising. This is the all-star enchantment in this deck. When it comes in, if your creature is power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, so even without Goreclaw on the battlefield, we have trample now. And then whenever a creature with power 4 or greater comes in, we draw a card. This is 3 great effects stapled onto 1 card for 3 mana, and this is one of those cards you want to see. Next up, we got Growing Rites of Itlimoc, one of my favorite green enchantments of all time. Front side, you're going to look at the top 4, put a creature from your hand, from them into your hand, put the rest on the bottom. But the end step, if you control 4 or more creatures, you transform it, and it's a Gaia's Cradle on the backside. Believe me, that is huge in a format like ours, and I will happily take a Gaia's Cradle when it comes to not having to spend $500 on a Gaia's Cradle, but when it comes to getting the benefit of a Gaia's Cradle, especially when we have something like Concordant Crossroads out. Sylvan Library, it's a good green card. It does a lot. We don't mind paying the life, especially if it'll put us ahead, especially if we get one of those key pieces. Unnatural Growth, it ends games, especially in this deck. When you double the power and toughness of those creatures, they get even harder to block. And if you ever pair this with a Crater Hoof or with an Emery's Forerunners or any one of these other buff cards, it's most likely game over for at least one opponent on that attack, if not all of them, if you place them right. And then we got a couple ramp enchantments. I really like these because a lot of people don't play a ton of enchantment removal, but Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl, both 1 mana, both choose a land. Wild Growth can go on anything. Utopia Sprawl can only go on a forest, but they're both going to come down and make that land tap for another green. These are my favorite turn 1 plays if I have them. He just ramps us so far ahead. So far ahead. And that's what we really want to do. Artifacts, not that many. Arcane Signet used to not be in the deck, but I think it's worth it. It's such a good card, especially for 2 mana. If I have nothing better to do on turn 2 or turn 3, it's a really good play. And I mean, it's a staple, right? It's a staple in our format. We have Emerald Medallion. Makes all of our green spells cost 1 less to cast. It's going to bring down the cost of everything, not just creatures. Remember, Goreclaw only reduces creatures. This reduces everything. This is a good card if you can afford it for your green decks, and I think it just ends up helping a lot. We have the Henge, the Great Henge. One of my favorite cards of the last few years. Cost X like the cast, where X is the greatest power. Comes in, taps for 2 green and gets you 2 life, which is already good. But the big thing is, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. If we have enough green mana, I mean, you can go really deep with Great Henge. You can start drawing a lot of cards. And I have had some turns with Selvala and things like that where you can just get massive amounts of green mana. and push yourself into those win cons right away just by drawing, looting, play that creature, draw, play that creature, draw. The newest card in the deck is Monster Manual, a card that I actually have yet to play in the deck, but I think it's going to work really well. 4 mana for an artifact. 1 in the green, tap it, put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. Man, I'd love to pay 2 mana for a Crater Hoof instead of 8. Man, I'd love to pay 2 mana for a Gnawbone instead of 5, right? There's a lot of ways that I think this can pay off, and I see Goreclaw sometimes on turn 3 and 4 when you're not sure if you want to run your board out yet. You're not sure if you want to make these big plays with your creatures yet. I think this is one of those cards that's the perfect window for that card. Dump it down, and then you can start taking advantage of it every turn cycle. And our last artifact, Sword of the Feast and Famine. This card is really good. A lot of removal ends up being in black or white, right? That's where most of your removal's in, so giving it protection from black is just really good. Now, unfortunately, it does give us protection from green, so we got to be a little bit careful with what creatures we put this on. But that second ability, whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards card and you untap all your lands. Man, we'll take it. We'll take every land that gets untapped. I've got the Moxfield put up in front of me because I actually don't remember. We're playing 33 lands, which I know is something that a lot of people don't like. But the problem is in this deck, like, you want the lands in your opening hand and you want to get to a critical mass of lands, but then you don't want to see them. This deck really wants to hit that curve and just fly. And so I've actually cut this down from about 35 to 33 because it still performs. And all these lands, I'm only playing a couple non-forest lands. We're playing snow forests. We've got 27 of them. But all the rest of these are utility lands that are doing big things. Faceless Hand, Search Wall off into the north, and just a good land. For 3 snow mana, it becomes a 4/3 with Vigilance in all creature types. So it's going to get buffed by Goreclaw. It's going to get buffed by any of these effects. And it just becomes a really good another attacker or a good blocker that people may forget about. Beseiju. In my opinion, it's a green staple. Take out that pesky artifact enchantment or non-basic land that somebody controls. Yes, you lose the Beseiju for it, but a lot of the times we're going to be able to play this for a single green. It's going to do us so much good to take that pesky enchantment or artifact out of the way. Mosswort Bridge. We'll have no problem satisfying the 10 power for Mosswort Bridge, and so this is always a good turn 1 or 2 play. Hide away something, get it exiled face down, and then take advantage of it later when we can play it. Lair of the Hydra, I like this just because it becomes another attacker or a blocker if we need it. A lot of times it ends up just tapping for a green, and unfortunately it ends up coming in tapped more times than I would like, but when you need it, when you need to dump the 6 mana into it or the 7 mana into it to get a nice attacking creature, it puts in the work, and that's why I like it. Castle Garenbrig, one of the best lands in this deck. Comes in tapped unless you control a forest, which is almost every land in our deck. You put 4 into it, you get 6 mana, and you can only use it to cast creature spells or activate the abilities of creatures, which ends up, the abilities thing actually ends up helping more than we think it does. But I would love to turn 5, 4 mana turns into 6, and it just helps you. It helps you going forward. And the last land, Nykthos. Nykthos in this deck can get really good. Paying 2, choose a color, and most of the time we're getting 8 or 10 mana from how many green pips that are on our creatures. It's going to add us a ton of mana. And Nykthos is a land that I didn't have in here for a long time, but since I've added it, it's become a really huge addition. And every time I see it, it definitely puts in massive work. Like I said before, this is my favorite deck. This is a deck that's a ton of fun to play. Like I said, I love giving this to new players because it's easy to grasp the concept, but it takes a little bit of skill and mastery to know when to push and when not to. I think this deck looks like a really big mid-range deck. This looks like one of those decks that takes a little bit to set up. But I think the reason that this deck is good for me is I like to play this deck a little more aggressive. I like to push my advantage a little bit more than probably most people would with a deck like this. And I think it tends to bode really well for me because I'm willing to take the risks and I'm okay with the downsides that happen with those risks. I found a lot of times in Magic when you have a combat deck where you need to win by combat, you have to be okay with taking some questionable attacks because it's going to make your defending players have to make some questionable blocks. They don't know if you have a pump. They don't know if you have something waiting. Or you may force them to get rid of some creatures or some pieces that they really need for their strategy to stop you from just mowing over them with the amount of creatures that you have. I'm not saying that that's a fast pass to just attack literally every time that you can. I don't think that's the case. I still think you got to pick your attacks well. You got to know when something needs to attack and when something doesn't, when you think you can get the value out of it. But with this deck, almost every attack ends up being really good, because if someone's going to bother to chump or someone's going to try to trade, they're going to trade a lot. They're not going to be just trading a little 1/1 for our 1/1. They're going to be trading a couple creatures for our big creatures, and that's value, especially if we had those creatures out for a couple turns, right? If a lot of our creatures have been out for 3 or 4 turns and then they get blocked and get killed, well, great, we've already gotten so much attack value off of them. Now, every creature in this deck that has haste becomes infinitely better the later in the game we get it. Because then that means on those big turns where we're dumping down a ton of mana and we're trying to end in a Crater Hoof, or we're trying to end in a Concordant Crossroads, or we're trying to end in a Triumph, those big creatures or those bigger creatures with haste are something that our opponents are not going to expect. They're going to expect us to dump our hand. They're going to expect us to play these big green creatures, but they're going to say, "Oh, well, they have to go around the table. They have to untap with them. It's okay. We got a window." But if we can play our play lines into these cards that will end the game that turn, it's going to allow us to take great advantage of the board state that we're creating and hopefully catch some people off guard. This deck has gone through so many incarnations. You can see even in the creatures in this deck plays a lot of green creatures over Magic's history. Now, it is skewed a little bit more towards newer creatures because I think I'm a sucker for a good extended art frame. So like I love seeing that. But I think what I like about this deck is that I can take out a Kogla or a creature like that and put in any creature I want and try it out and see if it fits the deck. If a new 7 mana 6/6 green creature comes out, hey, I know that's only going to cost 5, and I'm willing to try that out in this deck and see if it's any good. Like that's something like Titan Ministry. I knew it was probably going to be good, but I was like, is it going to be able to give me as much value? And yes, it does. It does give you a lot of really good value. Tasky was definitely a late addition in this deck. We don't get the reduction, so it is a hard 4 mana to cast. But I think the first time that you take a giant attack with a Tasky on board and you refill your hand, you'll understand why Tasky is really good. And when it attacks, it has indestructible, so you really don't have to worry about it dying, which is okay. I don't mind attacking with it even if it's a 2/2 and getting gummed up, because it's not the important card. It just helps enable the important cards. And the one thing I want to do at the end of all of my deck techs, just to give you an idea, this deck works with almost any hand that I've ever drawn with it. Because a lot of times you're hitting your lands in stride and you're going to see your ramp. But I would not keep less than 2 lands with this deck. I've kept a lot of 2-land hands that have worked out. But if you can get any more than that, it just makes the deck even better. I said in the main squeeze episode we did a long time ago that if you can get Goreclaw down before turn 4, you're money. And I think that's the truth. If you can get her down quicker than turn 4, where we would expect to get her down anyway, your turn 4 if you get her down on turn 3, or your turn 5 if you get her down on turn 4, will be massive, and it will really push your strategy forward. So this is a ton of fun. The deck list is going to be down in the description. It's actually a link to my personal Moxfield. You can go see everything that I've brewed on that. I make stuff public when I finish my deck lists. I keep them updated. I use a naming scheme where I will always show you at the end of the deck name what the most recent set was that I updated the deck in. That way, if you go take a look at the deck that's in my archive, or you could take a look at a deck that's in my test box, you know when the last time was that I looked at it, when the last time was that I updated it. And I don't update my main decks after every set, unless there's a lot of new cards that come out. Like Commander Legends 2 was a big example of a set that affected every single one of my decks in my deck box. So most of the decks right now will have that tag, and they will have that tag probably for a little bit. But for example, I don't expect Dominaria United to change every deck that I have sitting in my deck box. So that's kind of how the naming nomenclature goes. So that way when you jump on over to the Moxfield and you want to take a look at any of the deck lists that I have on there, you can see that. The second thing is I'm trying my best not to delete old deck lists. It's something I've done in the past, and I'm trying to corral up some of my old deck lists and keep them, because I think it's cool to see. Sometimes you want to bring old decks back. I'm actually about to start doing some brew videos by myself, talking about how I approach building decks and how I build decks for myself. And a lot of those first couple episodes are going to be reviving old lists and bringing them back and updating them and kind of retooling them to fit, modern cards, or maybe I've learned a lot of good lessons since I built them the first time. That's what happens a lot, is I build a deck the first time and it doesn't work, and I come back 6 months later and I'm like, why didn't I see this 6 months ago? I should have saw this. But I think that comes with the experience of deck building, experience of trying new things, trying new strategies. I never would have thought a year ago that I would have a Spellslinger deck almost built, being in that final test stage, almost being built. And they're not generally my thing, but I have one of them in my main deck. It's more of a permanent based Spellslinging deck than it is spells. But the new one with Kess, this is a Spellslinging deck, and I never thought I would build something like that. Same thing with I have a Layla in my final test box, which is an artifacts tokens deck. Those are the kind of decks that we'll be doing deck checks on after I get through all my main decks. But those are the kind of decks I never thought a year ago that I'd be pursuing. But now I'm having a ton of fun with them, to be honest. And that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going. I love my main decks. I love the decks that I have built, and I will play them on request for anyone. But what keeps me playing the game of Commander specifically is trying new things and learning, really in all reality, how to be a better player, how to approach the game, and how to enjoy the game. I will admit sometimes I lack the foresight to want to be more casual. Sometimes I get in the zone. Not that I want to always win, but I like to get in the zone, play the right plays, make the good plays. And that's what I gain. That's what's fun for me, is playing the right plays. Not necessarily winning, but playing a good game, playing a clean game, and trying to make the best play I can in every moment and learning from my mistakes. And believe me, I've had a lot of mistakes. Oh man. But I think when you look back and you see decks like this that shine and become decks that I love to play and I love to hand to new people, it makes my heart happy to see the game that I love translate well for other people. But guys, that is Goreclaw. Like I said, deck down in the description, and I will catch you guys next time.